Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Karker Gold, your host of this series in which we will be reading every single chapter of the Bleach manga, providing critical analysis of the art and narrative, personal response to the chapters, as well as discussing how they connect to the rest of the series as a whole. So, if any of that interests you, you are in the right place. As usual, we will begin with a reading of the chapter that we are currently on. This is Chapter 50, Quincy Archer Hates You, Part 2, Blind but Bleed Mix. What? Ah! This isn't possible. Ichigo cut Minos from foot to head. Minos is retreating. Victory! What? What a guy. He chased away that behemoth. What a guy. Sweet. Well done. No wonder the boss thinks so highly of him. He's not such a loser, I guess. He's pretty tough, huh? Tessai. Perhaps he will be, in time, if he can learn to control it. Bleach, Chapter 50, Quincy Archer Hates You, Part 2, Blind but Bleed Mix. Hey. What, no thank you? What? I cleaned up your mess for you. I think his thank you is in order. Ichigo? What are you doing? Stop fooling around. Huh? What the? I can't move. What? What the heck? What's happening? The shape. The Zarto is losing its integrity. All that spirit energy released at once is out of control. I'd better do something. Ichigo! I haven't even touched it, and it's reacting. The energy is flowing in. It's even greater than before. No, I can't maintain its weapon form. It's going to explode. I know. This can work. Ichigo's excess spirit energy. I'll still it, focus it, and release it over and over until his energy level stabilizes. What are you doing? Shut up. What? I don't know what you're doing, but stop it. Your arms are getting torn to shreds. Shut up. I told you, I hate Soul Reapers. You said to me, if we both don't survive, we can't fight each other. Then you wanted me to thank you? You're crazy. Live, so I could beat you up, Ichigo Kurosaki, and you can end me too. Okay? Endure it. It's almost over. Endure it. If Ichigo's energy continues to overload, his spiritual body will be blown to pieces. If that happens, it will be your fault, Uryu Ishida. It's your fault for employing such reckless methods. To avenge my master, I searched for Soul Reapers for years. When I finally found one, I had to show him I was superior. So, even though I know it might endanger others, I chose this method. But that stupid Soul Reaper asked me to join forces with him. I'm sorry, Master. I knew that you never hated Soul Reapers, that your dearest wish was for us to join forces with them. Maybe I was trying to forget my weakness in not risking my life to help you. By blaming the Soul Reapers, I tried to forget my own shame. Master, today I will help a Soul Reaper. Can you forgive me? I am a weak disciple who wouldn't die for you. Can you ever forgive me? Master. Huh. How can I punch someone who looks so miserable? Rats. Minos appeared and was defeated. This information won't take long to reach the Soul Society. Ichigo. Come on, time to clean up, Aruru. Tessai, fix that crack in the sky, okay? I'm on it. Jinta, hold the side flat. Huh? Okay. Secret Remote Squad, Essential 46. Locate missing personnel and criminal. Tosho Bureau Squad 13. Rukia Kuchiki. And that is it for Chapter 50 of the Bleach manga. Yet another interesting chapter as we conclude the end of this arc. Let's make sure that we aren't, I'm pretty sure we aren't at the end of the volume, but yeah, pretty sure we weren't. Just had to double check. You never know. That surprised me on the first volume, but I'm pretty sure that they actually include a, like, this is it for this volume little indicator. Anyway, let's talk about the chapter. Let's talk about both the art and the narrative and kind of how both are functioning here. Kind of do a little bit of more critical analysis of what's going on instead of just indulging in it. Because I think this is a kind of neat chapter. It certainly introduces some new information, but also it does a lot of weird things. A lot of things that I kind of want to talk about. So, anyway, on this first page, obviously we're just getting the kind of reaction where Ichigo has slashed up the Minos. He hasn't killed it or anything, but he's struck it a pretty devastating blow. And I love that, you know, we're given so much to kind of sell the Minos' stature, like just these like huge shots of it. I think that's one of the things that, if I remember correctly, the anime didn't really sell for me as well as this kind of like how imposing the Minos Grande was. Whereas I think the manga does a better job of it, but it's all just kind of how it's depicted. Regardless, you know, we get this kind of huge howl that goes down the whole page that helps travel. You know, I like that Ishida braces himself, but Ichigo is real into it. You know, he's excited because he dealt this blow, but we get these different reactions from these different characters, and we can really tell where they all are in relation to this. Of course, Rukia is continuously blown away. I mean, the same was true whenever Ichigo took all of her power, right? You know, like so much of like this is impossible. Uh, it's kind of the way that Kubo tries to sell Ichigo as this kind of larger than life protagonist, right? That he's capable of doing the impossible. Certainly, you know, we're going to encounter other characters that can handle Aminos no problem. I mean, one of them is in this scene right now, right? Like, if Urahara couldn't handle this situation, then he probably wouldn't trust Ichigo to be able to do it, you know? Um, like, we get the extreme sense that, like, should everything go wrong, Urahara will just clean this up. But, you know, he'd rather these other people rise to the challenge, if that makes sense. So, yeah, you know, like, we already get the sense that, like, yeah, like, oh, this isn't possible. I think she's speaking more from, you know, this isn't possible from Ichigo, right? Ichigo, who is, you know, he's been a Soul Reaper for a few months, right? He hasn't trained his entire life. He certainly is 150 years old with, you know, several years of academy training behind him. He's still a substitute Shinigami and a teenager. And so, like, you know, the idea that he's capable of doing so much is meant to be, you know, kind of important within both the scope of the manga and to us as the reader. This is kind of common, you know. You always get like that kind of, oh man, he's capable of doing these things that no one else is. Because yeah, that's how you make a main character cool, I guess. You make them, you know, especially powerful or able to rise to challenges that aren't expected of them. You create these kind of impossible odds and have them overcome them. That's very much the shonen standard. Uh, you know, it's fun seeing the ways in which a protagonist can overcome what you thought was impossible for them. The problem with that is that, you know, you then have to start introducing higher and higher stakes. And so if you're a bad writer, you just make everything stronger and stronger, and you don't really think about how to cohesively link those things. So much so that it's like, well, it's, the beginning of a series is a far cry from the end of it, and the power scaling's, dreadful. Uh, it's one of the things that I think, that's probably what bothers me. Talking about contemporaries bothers me a lot about Naruto. I think One Piece handles its power scaling a little bit better. Like, it introduces serious threats early on, and then we build to those threats, over the course of the entire manga. So we get the idea of like these large in the life characters and how powerful they are pretty early. And so, whenever they can finally be confronted and actually like handled at least, on a one level, or actually even defeated, that's exciting. But I think Naruto, it starts off and it's so small in its scope, and it's so small as far as what the characters are capable of. And like I said, at the end of it, like, they're throwing planet destroying meteors, like they're just full on wizards. It's ridiculous. It goes from like small scale ninja, like, skirmishes, to kind of insane scenarios that, I don't know. Like, yeah, it's cool. It's really over the top. That's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that, like, the scale of it just kind of fluxes way out of control, and some of the appeal of this is a character that really couldn't handle these odds is lost. And to an extent, that's maybe a criticism that I will levy against Bleach in some ways. I think where it works, and where it doesn't, it really doesn't. Yeah, but like, there's other ways to do this, right? If you want to create an antagonist that's like a threat to your main character, you don't just need to make them stronger. You could make them more clever. You could make them be unassailable for, different reasons, right? Maybe the protagonist can't attack them because if they do, there will be other consequences outside of the protagonist's hands, and so he has to figure out like a unique solution to the situation, right? So it can't just come down to a straight up and down fight. And I think those sorts of like challenges and all of that can be kind of more interesting and create for a more interesting dynamic. And there's certainly some of that in Bleach as well. It doesn't always come down to a fight, though it usually does. Anyway, point being is that, this is the first that we really start to see, like, okay, well, here's this, kind of like really grand hollow, haha. We get this great hollow threat that we haven't had before, in Ichigo has to rise to the challenge to defeat it. Things that I like that people often overlook is like Ichigo doesn't defeat this Minos whatsoever. Like, he hits it once, and then it's like, fuck this, and it goes back. It leaves. So, like, that's kind of, I like that. I like that. Ichigo still gets his win, but he hasn't killed this thing. Right? He hasn't even wounded it like he has, with Grand Fisher. And that's the thing to note is, like, for these kind of more significant antagonists, Ichigo's barely pulling through by the skin of his teeth, and he's not defeating them. He's just managing to land like a serious blow, and then usually the antagonist retreats, and we'll see that repeated a few times too. Anyway, we get, I love this, like, it literally pulling the fabric of reality back as it retreats. Kisuke doesn't look happy with that whatsoever. He probably wanted a more climactic sort of fight back and forth to perhaps awaken more between Ichigo and Uryu. But, is what it is. I love, again, using the bottom of the page, this like really tall shot of the Minos. I think this is fantastic as it just kind of sinks back into, the extra dimensional space it came from, the rip in reality. And it's just like, yeah, peace. Of course, Ichigo ecstatic about winning. Yeah, and, we get a lot of the other characters kind of remarking on that too, right? Because that's the other thing is, like, whenever you have other people to really register how significant an event is, then everybody else, then you as the reader can get the sense of that significance too. Like, if something happens, you don't know, is that powerful in this universe or not? Like, is that worthwhile or not? Unless the other characters are building the stakes as well. So, having Rukia say things like it's impossible, or, Tessai being like, no wonder the boss thinks so highly of him, et cetera, that all really sells this moment. Yeah, like even Jinx is a little impressed. But yeah, this idea that, he's pretty tough, and Tessai is like, perhaps he will be in time. I think that's a fantastic thing, I always love when a series does this kind of thing that like promises growth, like there's always the, you're not strong enough, but you will be kind of thing. That's cool. I like that. It gives us the clear sense that there's going to be development. And so even if the character's really cool right now and has neat powers, and you think the fights have been neat, like there's still room to grow, and the author is clearly signing that the character will grow. But yeah, there's this idea of control that got brought up in the previous chapter, and here, maybe he hasn't learned to control it, and perhaps that's why Urahara isn't as happy with this outcome as he could have been, is because he probably wanted Ichigo to learn how to really control his powers here, because it's, learn to control your powers or die. Yeah, and of course we have Ichigo about to give this table tennis serve. Yeah. Weird that 58 is his number here. It's usually 15 that's associated with him. So, I think I don't know what 58 would be really making reference to, because it's not the chapter number either. Anyway, yeah, we get this back and forth between Ichigo and Uryu, which I think is great. Ichigo getting kind of pissed that Uryu isn't more grateful. I love that. I love especially like the expressions on both of them. That Uryu still kind of overwhelmed by this. I think that's like a cool kind of a neat moment of aftermath. But then of course Ichigo flops because his energy is still so. We talked about that this previous chapter that he built up all this energy and now it's bursting out of him, but the pressure is still too high. That he's still got too much trying to flow out all at once, and so it'll literally destroy him. Right? It'll like he can't release it all at once himself, and he can't control it. So it might literally make him explode. At least that's what's implied here with what Uryu says. Um, yeah, there's a little bit of like kind of unique and weird stuff going on here with his sword, right? Where the Zanpakuto flies up into the air, right, as he reaches out to grasp it, and then takes like warps and shapes, losing its integrity, right? Because the idea is that it's a manifestation of his spirit energy. That's the thing to kind of keep in mind here. It's easy to forget in Bleach, but right now Ichigo is literally like in his ghost form, right? He isn't corporeal, and so he's not subject to the same rules as actual physical matter. And so his weapon, which is a manifestation of his spiritual power, is losing its integrity because his power is not under control, because it's not solidified the way it should be. Yeah, so it's kind of like statically going out. It's a kind of wild image regardless. I like to, Uryu runs over to help do something about it, and then he gets this. I love this like kind of up angle shot of him being surprised, and then we come to the next page, and his bow is growing massive. Um, and it's just because he has all this energy flowing out from him. And again, we get like that energy, and the power of his bow is what is destroying Uryu, right? Um, and then he, essentially from the discussion that we got before in the previous chapter, again, the way that Quincy power works is they're kind of drawing in this energy around them, and then they use their own Reiatsu or spiritual power to kind of form that energy into a weapon. And so, that's why he's like, oh, I can't maintain its weapon form. It's going to explode. Is because his own power isn't sufficient to kind of keep it all contained into the form of a weapon. Um, which is kind of ludicrous to think about. It's so much power that's kind of flowing out of Ichigo. So he starts firing these arrows into the sky to release that energy, which is it's a neat kind of way of the two of them working together. Not what you would have expected, but neat nevertheless. I wish that there were some hollows to blast with these massive arrows. Nevertheless, like I say, nevertheless, regardless, we don't. We just get kind of him firing off into the sky. Uh, but yeah, a lot of Ichigo freaking out because he doesn't know what's going on. And really, are you suffering? And I think this is a great moment for Ishida. It's a moment that you might not have expected, especially going into this arc. But even coming into this chapter, uh, we've got all the elements were there, right? The bow kind of shredding up his body, him able to take on Ichigo's power, all of that, and then instead of it getting used to defeat this enemy, it's used to aid Ichigo. And so that's whenever I talk about subversion, it's not like I think it's easy to think of subversion narratively as like, ha ha, we did something unexpected and tricked you. And I don't see it, whenever it's used well, it's not a trick, you know? It's that your expectations are built one way and then you are pleasantly surprised with something that you didn't expect to happen. Like that the author is capable of realizing the narrative kind of things that they're putting in front of you, all the clues and hints, and they're building you towards one expectation so that whenever the other thing is delivered, it will be more genuinely surprising. Not that it's a trick or anything like that. And that's really what's happening here, is that we had it all built up towards Uryu won't be able to save the day, Ichigo might need to, or Uryu will use Ichigo's power to shoot these massive arrows at the hollow. And instead, it's all leveraged for this almost self-sacrificial moment where he's able to fire that energy and release it for Ichigo. And I think that's cool. It's something that I hadn't expected going in, right? Even on this reread, even knowing how this goes, I was like, oh yeah, I completely forgot this moment. But it's a really cool moment, and it really solidifies the sort of bond that Ichigo has quickly made with Ishida, right? You can really see how the things that Ichigo said have resonated with him as we go forward here. And of course, Ichigo doesn't want Ishida to kill himself with this, but here he is, just getting mangled. And we get some more insight, and I like the insights we get here, and that the other thing is that these insights are ones that are provoked specifically by Ichigo, right? Um, Ichigo being so contradictory with like, oh, we've got to fight each other. You wanted me to thank you, all of that. It ultimately puts Uryu in this place where, yeah, he wants Ichigo to live, and they're like, so I can beat you up and you can hit me too. Like that's more of like less like a serious sort of I'll rough you up, you can rough me up, whatever. Like less of a I want to kill you rivalry and more of like, okay, we could settle things on our own terms, like more like friends than anything else. Um, and yeah, I love that we get this kind of internalization because Uryu's aware of the stakes here. He knows that if Ichigo continues to take on all of this spiritual energy into his body, his spirit will literally be blown to pieces, right? I believe that this ends up later on being called soul suicide. The idea that your spiritual body can take on so much pressure that if you can't control it, your spirit will literally explode. You'll like cease to exist, right? That's the problem with being super powerful within this universe or taking on a lot of power at once. It is a concept that will get revisited. I guess slight spoilers there, but yeah, it's just something that if you're reading these early chapters and translation wise, we've already talked about how things like Sero or Keto or whatever get translated differently later on. I believe that this is the whole concept of soul suicide. Um, which, again, is the idea that your spiritual body is taking on too much spiritual energy for it to really contain. And here his body's trying to release it, but it can't release it quick enough. The pressure is too high, and so the pipes are going to burst. Right, using that metaphor from previously. But I love that the conclusion that Uryu comes to is, he realizes that he was reckless. He realizes that he was wrong, and a lot of that's because of what Ichigo said to him. You know, he realizes that this was kind of selfish on his end. Uh, even if he calls Ichigo stupid, he realizes, a lot of this is literally because it's his own weakness, right? He wasn't able to save his master, so he's going to blame anyone but himself. And if he could just prove that he's strong and capable of beating Hollows and better than Soul Reapers are doing it, then, he could prove that maybe he could have saved his master, but even in the past, he was too afraid to, right? So he's over compensating for not being able to face Hollows in the past by trying to be like, look, I could defeat all the Hollows now. I could save everybody because it was failure to save people in the past, which is, it's tragic, right? We start to get a little bit. I was really worried here when we got this blank panel. Obviously, the idea is to align, the text center. The focus here isn't on a character in the character moment, which is what we're getting here in the top right panel. It's on this, idea. Today, I will help a Soul Reaper. And that's like a significant moment for Uryu because Quincy Archer hates you, right? Because his entire character and his motivations so far have been predicated on hating Soul Reapers. I mean, his first dialogue is like, I'm Uryu Ishida and I hate Soul Reapers. So, it's significant. It's a real change in the character, and this is a change that wouldn't have happened without Ichigo directly addressing him and interacting with him in these ways that made sense for Ichigo. So it's positive character growth in a way that isn't forced. What I mean is it feels like narratively it has been earned. That everything that's because here I'm gonna part the kimono, bring you backstage behind the production, all of that stuff. Uh, Everything inside of any story is forced. Literally, a writer is writing it. But the idea is that as you read, you build immersion with the story, right? Think of it as like, immersion is essentially a button that you have your hand on, or like if you I think the button works best, really. You have your hand on this immersion button, right? Um, you are immersed. You're into the story, and so long as your hand is on that button, uh, the story is going to continue to work for you. It's going to bring you these places that you find believable. But as soon as things start to happen within the story that are harder for you to process, believably, right? Like if a character's coming to certain realizations, even though it doesn't seem like it makes sense for them to, or if a character uses a power that it's just out of nowhere and there's no setup structure for how they might have achieved that power or awakened to it, um, all of that, which, like I said, that could be an issue for some people in Bleach. Like, we don't question so much Chad awakening this power, but I feel like that moment still kind of works because he's calling out for it and all of that. And to a lesser extent, or a Hime whenever she manifests her power, because we already had the presence of Chad doing that, right? But for some people, that might break their immersion. Like, what, Chad can just get powers out of nowhere? And, it helps that we've had Don Kanoji and Ishida establish that, humans can develop powers, right? So, like, that's the thing that I'm talking about. So, pretty much everything's forced by the author. Everything's imaginary and invented. It's just that how much that narrative keeps your hand on that immersion button, how much that narrative keeps you as a reader immersed, will determine whether or not you're actually engaged within the narrative, and that how much these moments will land for you. And so what I'm saying is, like, this moment really lands for me because I feel like it organically comes out of everything that's been presented to us so far. Um, you have all these other moments in other manga where uh, there are supposed to be kind of significant story beats, but they don't really land as well, and they become kind of laughing stocks for different reasons. Um, Again, kind of returning to its contemporaries, and slight spoilers for those two. So bear with me. It's been spoilerific this episode, I swear. I try to keep it light on the non-spoiler sections, but talking a little bit about things that'll show up later in the series and all that. Anyway, for other contemporary series that I feel like they don't really earn those moments. There's a lot of them in Naruto, obviously. I mean, I'm talking about the big three here, but how much Naruto harps on Sasuke being his friend, and having this bond with Sasuke, and it's outside of the first arc, it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't. It's hard to buy, right? Just like Naruto tries to have these moments where it'll say okay, well, uh, Naruto is this huge social pariah, and he didn't have any friends growing up. But then we see all these scenes where he did have some friends, right? And he had other people in his life. So I don't know, those kind of it tries to have these dramatic moments without really earning them. And it happens a lot for me in Naruto, and I think that's maybe one of its larger failings. One Piece has a couple of them that I think depend really on, again, how much you're personally immersing with it. I think everything with Ace, and that character, and later on, of course, with Luffy's expression at the end of that entire event, that because Luffy gets very, very emotionally sort of responsive to Ace in a way that we haven't really seen from him before. Um, that doesn't work for a lot of people, and I think it's half because of the art, but also I think it's because it didn't feel like there was as much a connection there for that to be the reaction. Um, I will say an author that gets it perfectly, and one that again I've recommended before on this channel, but I will continue to recommend because I didn't expect it and it surprised me. But Makoto Raikou, the guy that does Zatch Bell. So if you read Zatch Bell or Animal World, like Daibotsu no Kuni. Anyway, either of those manga are fantastic at earning their emotional beats. They really earn them. I think it's not something that feels forced or whatever. And honestly, I've said this before, the ending of Zatch Bell I think is a really cool ending and has a really emotional kind of cathartic final kind of moment that is better than I've seen from any of the long running shonen series. So yeah, read Zatch Bell. It's weird, but read it. Alternatively, if you want something maybe a little bit more mature, read Animal Kingdom. Um, that one's fantastic too. But I think both of those, they earn these very, very emotional moments because they actually build these bonds between these characters. They actually explore a lot of what the characters believe and they think and what they would live and die by. And to an extent, Bleach does that as well. And I think that's, whenever the moments that are emotional in Bleach really work, they really do work. I haven't got anything yet on this reread that has struck me as emotionally as that moment with Orihime and her brother, which is pretty early on. But, there have been a lot of really, really exciting and cool moments that I think have really worked well too. Um, I think that's the thing is you have to remember at the end of the day, this is about cool powers and characters fighting monsters and stuff. So it's less about having very intense emotional moments and more about having, or any sort of romantic sort of things, which I know a lot of people were interested in romantic angles and shipping these characters or whatever. But it's a battle manga first and foremost, and so that's what's good. Its focus is going to be, even if it does deliver on these other things from time to time. Anyway, I like that we get, again, Ishida. I love the way that the fingers are kind of dripping up into this other panel almost. It reads very, very well, kind of going down vertically. But the idea of Ishida being like this small figure in this very large panel, and like the idea of him having these really large, kind of grandiose, sort of reaching out to someone that's passed away. It's interesting. This arc we've gotten, we've evoked a lot of these characters thinking about these kind of paternal figures and how they've lost them, right? And I think that's like a common link here between a lot of these characters. So we get Chad, and he's thinking about his abuelo, and the assumption is that his abuelo is dead, but that he's remembering his own mentorship under his abuelo. And then with Orihime, she's remembering everything with her brother and her hair and Tatsuki, right? And then here with Ishida, he's remembering his mentor, and he's searching for forgiveness. And Ichigo to a lesser extent mentions his mother and his mother's death, but yeah, it's neat that we get that kind of connection for all these characters. That all these characters have not a shared trauma, like it's not like they've all gone through the same exact thing together, but that they all have had this sort of relational trauma in their past. I think in a lot of ways that makes it more relatable for many readers. I think a lot of people have, obviously it's pretty easy. You in order to exist, you have to have a family, like just straight up. And the nature of having a family is that you will have family members that are older than you. And so by the time that you are the target demographic to read Bleach, which is a teenage boy, or a teenager of whatever, you've probably experienced some sort of like trauma related to family. If it's not, someone that you were close to passing away, then it could be any sort of amalgamation of family related trauma. I mean, that's pretty common. That's just, as you grow older, more and more people will pass away, more and more people will have fights. You'll have connections, with your family first and foremost, because they're the people you're around the most, usually. So it's like drawing in family like this and not really harping on it, but really, really pulling into it, helps to make these characters feel more human, right? Because obviously that's something that we all go through, and so thinking about the characters in that way, it's something that they've gone through too. Anyway, of course, God, the nail cracking's a bit much, but we land on this kind of moment of Ishida falling to his knees. Again, the typical kind of swept clouds of Bleach here, as he calls out to his master, and he feels like he's sort of inadequate. And yeah, Ichigo, how can I punch someone who looks so miserable? It's neat, and I love that. Of course, Ichigo's laying down, but we could have gotten him shot anyway. But we get him like looking up to the other panel, and I think that's fantastic too. The way that you arrange your characters on page is pretty significant. I will say, I think one of my favorite moments of this, and it only really works in the handheld physical version, rather than digital, but in Chainsaw Man, there's a moment where a character can see the future, and you get like a close up of them like looking sideways across the panel, and having like a real moment of realization, and then reacting to something before it happens. And then on the next page, which is the page that they were looking over at, is whenever it does happen. So it's like them literally looking across the page at the future of the manga. It's very cool. Chainsaw Man does a lot of really cool stuff with like arranging its panels and with its layout and its paneling. If you ever want, to like look at like kind of a master course of fantastic use of sequencing a manga, look at Chainsaw Man. It's good stuff. Anyway, but here I love this. We get Ichigo commenting on, of course, the Uryu. This page just has fantastic like layout in general. This very emotional moment for Uryu. We draw in on him, and then we get Ichigo kind of laying down and talking about what he's like literally looking up and partaking, viewing like we are. It's cool. Anyway, Rukia then reflects on this, and I think this is pretty significant, right? This idea that it won't take long for this information to reach Soul Society, right? So this is pretty significant. Obviously, she mentioned before, like it would be up to the royal guard essentially to designate how this Minos would be handled. So this threat appearing and being this significant is pretty important, and the fact that it disappeared, you know, this would all obviously gain the attention of Soul Society, and maybe to a degree, this is what Kisuke meant, right? Whenever he said this battle will be really important for both Ichigo and you, whenever he was talking to Rukia, because obviously this determines Soul Society's response as well. They all have to go and clean up. Obviously, we get a moment where like this is kind of easy to miss, but we get Jinta smashing this bug, which is a monitoring device, as we kind of find out. Um, it's kind of happening right here. Tessai is going to fix the crack in the sky, which he has devices to do so. I assume that was what was on his back, is something to actually handle that rather than to fight with, as he fought with his bare hands. But here, yeah, we have Kisuke looking over as Jinta smashes this, and then, moving on, and then telling Jinta to focus on holding the side flat, right? Because Jinta has been, of course, chasing down this bug that is actually a tracking device for Soul Society, right? So it's a secret remote squad to Central 46. Assumably some Soul Society organization, right? Locate missing personnel and criminal. Now, whenever it says Tosho Bureau Squad 13, that's talking about, I guess, the region, right? The Tosho Bureau. I assume that that's a relation to where Rukia has been kind of, what am I trying to say? Where she's been assigned, right? I gotta figure that that's the case. So her assignment is to Tosho, the Bureau of Tosho. I assume. I could be wrong, and if I am, please let me know. But she is a part of. I assume here, the idea is that she's a part of Squad 13, and she's essentially missing. Right? She hasn't reported back in months. It's been 2 months, right? She said. Since she's got the ski guy, and she is a criminal, which is pretty significant. So we're left on this moment of, Soul Society becoming aware. The worry was like, oh, with the Minos and everything, Soul Society to be really aware of Ichigo. But instead, the kind of takeaway here, again, using these kind of structures and building towards this expectation, like, oh, so Society is going to be aware and they're going to respond. Instead, we get a payoff to what we've been really building up to in the background of all of these chapters for a very long time, right? Is the idea that Rukia is a criminal and that she is going to be kind of reacted to. The reaction will be, going and apprehending her. So it's neat that we get this turnabout, right, where we think that maybe the reaction to Soul Society is going to be focused on Ichigo, right? Ichigo's got these Shinigami powers, even though he's a human. He's just defeated Minos, even though he's just 2 months as a Soul Reaper, and usually Minos are handled by these higher ups, right? And it's a lot to kind of deal with a Minos. But instead, the turnabout, the surprise, the subversion is that they're going for Rukia. But the cool thing is like I said, we've had all of this hints. We've had, even from the beginning, whenever Ichigo expresses to Rukia that she wasn't supposed to give her powers to him, that she, didn't do exactly what she said her duty was, right? Because she wanted to protect him. That was a minor thing. We got, Rukia talking so much about Soul Society being this place of, having these extreme laws of, criminals being punished or executed even, right? So we knew Soul Society to be a place with a judicial system and one that had execution for criminals. Um, we got the idea of Rukia definitely operating outside of the rules whenever we got everything with Cone, and especially with Urahara saying that he wouldn't be able to cover for her, right? And Rukia really acknowledging that. And so ultimately, like this is whenever it's all kind of coming to a head. Uh, yeah, exciting stuff. And of course, we get to see Ishida's Quincy Cross here at the very end of the in between art. Pretty cool. All in all, though, I think this is like all of them. I really like this chapter. It's a cool chapter. It has some really significant moments. I think ultimately, this moment from Ishida is really, really cool. I like it a lot. Um, that he has this moment of kind of personal introspection and realization, and it's all spurred on by Ichigo. I think it makes it a cool moment for both Ichigo and Uryu, and it really helps build the character in a way that I like him a lot more. You know, it helps to ground him and humanize him, and then also helps to make him mature in a way that I was, hoping for, because in a lot of ways he's being reckless, he's being immature with all of this, and so he's starting that path towards kind of growing and developing as a character, and you love to see that. Um, but yeah, lots of cool moments from a lot of characters, lots of reactions from characters. We could see characters in a lot of interesting ways, and then ultimately this promise that Soul Society is coming to apprehend Rukia, and what that means is payoff to a lot of what's been lurking in the background for this entire first 50 chapters, as it all sort of comes to a head. So pretty neat stuff. Good chapter. Like I said, probably not my favorite one of the entire arc, but it is a really cool way to conclude all of this, and I think you know does a good job of concluding this in a way that is exciting, grows these characters, and yet again moves towards the next arc with a good deal of momentum. So let's talk about spoilers, right? Let's talk about how this connects to the rest of the manga. Um, Obviously, Ichigo hitting the Minos and it fleeing back to Waco Mundo is pretty cool. Uh, I'm trying to think of, that is something that we kind of get before I mentioned this in the analysis that this would come up again, but the idea that Ichigo wins these fights just barely before collapsing. I mean that happened with Grand Fisher, and it happens here with the Minos Grande, and it's going to happen again with Kenpachi at least, right? And then later, he defeats. I say he defeats Byakuya, but not really. um, he fights Byakuya for a while, and then the Hollow has to take over, right? Uh, so I say the Hollow, White Zangetsu. Uh, but like, hmm, yeah, it's an interesting structure. People. I think whenever people criticize Bleach, at least whenever they criticize Ichigo, is like, oh, he's too strong, he's too powerful. He's within this small span of time, getting Shikai, Bankai, defeating these enemies that, like, I think a lot of people will point out Kenpachi, erroneously, of course. They're like, oh, Ichigo beats Kenpachi, but then he can't even beat Byakuya, and it's like, dude, Ichigo like fights Kenpachi and he's able to land a hit on him, but Ichigo's basically dead at the end of that fight, and Kenpachi's not. He's just kind of like knocked around. Furthermore, at that point, Kenpachi had already kind of had to deal with like fighting a lot of other characters. If I remember correctly, he already beat up Komamura and what's his face, Tosen, right? He'd already fought both of them. But furthermore, we know that Kenpachi's whole thing is that he scales his power to the opponent that he fights. So, yeah, of course, that moment, yeah, Ichigo lands a hit on him, but it's like this moment with the Minos, where it's like, no, you didn't really defeat it. You just hurt it, and then it fled. Um, yeah, this same thing happens constantly with Ichigo. Obviously, whenever we get to Hueco Mundo and the Karakura invasion earlier, Ichigo gets his ass kicked by Grimmjow, but um, there's a lot of like beating up enemies but not really finishing them off or landing a critical blow, but then kind of both parties being unable to continue the fight. So I don't know. I think Ichigo struggles tend to be much more desperate than people remember them as. That they remember these huge wins where it's like, oh, he you know struck this big blow against the Minos, but he didn't kill it. He just hit it. Same thing, like whenever he fights Grand Fisher, yeah, he fucks Grand Fisher up pretty well, but Grand Fisher still like gets in this other body and runs away. Grand Fisher could have probably killed Ichigo right there. It's just that he was worried that Rukia and company might do something more, I suppose, and it was being self-preservationist about it. Anyway, point is that that structure gets reused a whole bunch, and I think it's really meant to kind of sell that Ichigo is just barely able to meet the opponents that he's facing, but not, truly defeat them or overcome them. And it gives us clear markers for his growth too, obviously. Yeah, Minos is so cool. Anyway, I think we get a little bit of Tessai obviously talking about in time Ichigo can kind of control it. We get a focus on the Minos there, and it's subtle, but I could definitely read this as the idea of Ichigo controlling his hollow powers, Ichigo controlling his Quincy powers, and Ichigo controlling his Shinigami powers, right? The idea that he has a lot to kind of rein in and control. And the focus being on the Minos there certainly gives a sense of controlling at least the blast that he did, but as we talked about in the previous chatter, that was a blast that seemed culminative of his different kinds of powers. Anyway, this is kind of wild, this moment where the Zanpakuto is like really freaking out and changing shape and stuff. I mean, so we do get like a good bit about Zanpakuto later. I don't think we ever see a Zanpakuto undergo this again, this sort of like weird sort of shifting against the person's will, it losing its integrity. Usually we'll see them broken, obviously. We'll see them shatter, but I don't think we see them warp in quite the same way or distort. So it makes this a really strange moment. If there is another moment where this happens, and you can think of, definitely let me know. But I definitely read this, of course, as Ichigo kind of having a moment of kind of interestingly, Uryu saving him from soul suicide, which is, rereading this, it's not the way that I initially remember reading the chapters at all, but it's a pretty significant kind of moment. One thing I will say that is a little sad is that, and I mentioned this before, is that we never see this idea come back, right? The idea of Uryu really absorbing the Reiatsu that Ichigo is outputting, but I guess they never fight alongside each other again, really. So maybe that's the point. Anyway, yeah, we do. We do get that mention of if his energy continues to overload, his spiritual body will be blown up pieces. I'm almost positive that's just the early kind of trappings of soul suicide, and that's like that exact idea being brought up here. Kind of neat that Uryu brings that up, even though usually we get that in relation to characters undergoing holification, right? That they're their body's not able to handle like this spiritual energy, and so it collapses, or they undergo soul suicide. That their spiritual body can't handle it, and so like the that's kind of neat, and we get that in relation. I think if I'm correct, that's sort of the whole idea of Hollow Ryatsu being poisonous to Quincy. If I'm correct, if I'm remembering that appropriately, the idea of soul suicide being built out of the you know the whole Quincy Hollow Ryatsu thing. Um, yeah, then it would make a little bit more sense for this to come out of uh, whatchamacallit, to come out of Ichigo's point of view. But I'm almost positive that soul suicide is really just kind of related in blah, 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 related to holification and the idea of uh, you know that you take on this hollow Rietsu and your soul's not able to handle it. So I guess it does make sense for Quincy. Jeez, I'm running circles around this, but yeah, because the idea is that the Quincy's can't undergo hollowification because hollow Riatsu is essentially poisonous, right? Uh, that they literally they're not able to handle it on such a level that it always causes soul suicide. So it makes sense that I guess Uryu is aware of the idea of his energy overloading his body being blown to pieces, because that's entirely why what should I call it? Why Uryu he's a Quincy, but also why he would be aware of this for Ichigo as well. So it's kind of neat to think about, right? That this gets brought up by Uryu first and foremost, because it is something that would be of concern to Quincy. Um, Kind of neat. Something that you don't think about a lot, because usually whenever we think about soul suicide, right, that typically is something that we think about in relation to Urahara or Kisuke, and I say Urahara or Kisuke. I mean Kisuke or Mayuri, right? I think they both talk about it, um, and using the Hogekyo really to prevent soul suicide whenever a Shinigami is undergoing hollowification. Though, again, it does get brought up in regards to the Quincy and Hollow Ryatsu being poisonous to them. Um, so yeah, it's neat that we get that all kind of mentioned here really early. I mean, it's not made super explicit. We have a few dots to connect, right? But it makes sense that Ichigo, or not Ichigo, that Uryu would be aware of it, that he would be aware of what's happening to Ichigo, and that he would, kind of know a little bit of how to handle it, perhaps. Here, not because Ichigo's taken on this Hollow Ryatsu, but they certainly did just fight. Maybe it is, because they just did fight this Minos, and he just got all this power from perhaps even absorbing some of its own power from that Sero. So yeah, this is a kind of wild fucking moment, isn't it? Anyway, tell me what you think about this. Let me know. Obviously, mark your post for spoilers, but it's kind of insane to think about if you're thinking about it from the perspective of soul suicide and Uryu having all these insights into it, especially if you're thinking about Ichigo having used Quincy powers, especially earlier, to absorb a lot of that Reiatsu, even if it was Hollow Reiatsu, to redirect it back, whatever way. So yeah, insanely wild. I don't know that there's really that much else to talk about connection wise. Obviously, Uryu really grows from this idea of kind of standing on the sidelines and not being able to do anything. He takes a lot more agency going forward. I mean, obviously, this whole arc is him sort of overcompensating with his agency, but he figures out how to more maturely meet that out going forward, and to help Soul Reapers out and to kind of work towards this unity, which is pretty cool. Um, yeah. Anyway, there's, of course, this entire bit where, secret remote squad to Central 46. I don't know what the secret remote squad is off the top of my head. Maybe Squad 2? I'm not sure. Anyway, but the idea is, of course, Rukia is a criminal and she's missing, and she's a member of Squad 13, right? If I do remember correctly, right? Yukitake. Pretty sure that is Squad 13, almost positive off of the top of my head. If I am wrong, well, I guess I'll just have to deal with it. But I'm almost positive Squad 13 is Yukitake's squad, and that Rukia is, at the beginning of the series, at the very least, a member of 13. I think she ends up being the captain of it, right? That's the whole idea, is that she moves up to lieutenant seat and then to captain after Yukitake dies at the end of the series. So, kind of neat that she starts off here as a criminal. Obviously, as we come to learn, even at this point, I imagine Central 46 has been completely killed by Aizen, and that Aizen is really calling the shots. And so, all of this was more or less orchestrated to find Rukia because he knew that she had the Hogekko inside of her. So, it's kind of cool that we get this sort of confirmation, and this really lets us, knowing what happens in the future, really lets us know that, it is in fact, of course, confirmed here that this information was being given straight to Aizen, or, Central 46, quote unquote, right? Anyway, cool chapter. Some neat connections, like I said, I didn't expect all the stuff with Soul Suicide, especially. I don't know why I'm going back. There's no reason, no going back now. Anyway, yeah, this has been Bleach Chapter 50. Yet another long episode, yet another hour-long one. I try to keep them more concise if I can, but sometimes I have a lot to talk about. Anyway, thank you so much again for following me through this journey through Bleach, for listening to this entire episode, and for being a fan of the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would love to see you subscribe. You'd be able to see my videos in your feed every day as they're uploaded. Of course, with this series, if I'm not able to upload them for whatever reason, like for instance this episode and the previous one, I was having issues with my recording setup where it wasn't picking up my voice and I was having microphone issues, and I had to basically recalibrate quite a few things, but I wasn't able to record the previous episode on the date it came out. But anytime there's any sort of recording issue one way or another, internet issues, power failure, etc., then you are guaranteed to get the episodes that I missed out on the next possible day that I can upload them. So usually if I can't get one day, most of the problems tend to resolve within a day and I can get them the next. Should something more significant happen, I will try to keep you posted via the Twitter on this. You can check the comments, and if you look in the episode description, you can find the Twitter for this. I will always post there if there is ever any sort of issue. But, just go ahead and subscribe, and you can follow these videos daily. You can watch them, either as they come out or whenever you've got a couple build up. I always like to have, a podcast or something on in the background whenever I'm doing other things myself. So hopefully this serves as easy listening for you. Regardless, it is there for you. I thank you so much for following it anyway, regardless of how you indulge. Bleach is fantastic, and I love to read it. I love to celebrate it. I love to think about it, and I'm glad that it's seeing a bit of a renaissance even in the year 2022. So long after the end of its regular syndication, publication, all of that. Anyway, this has been Karker Gold. Thank you again for following all of this. If you like this episode, please, remember to give it a like. Go ahead and leave a comment on any of your insights. I really am interested in the things that you're seeing going on in this chapter, spoilers or otherwise. Obviously, if you're talking about spoilers, please mark it as such. But if you want to talk about anything that I brought up, feel free. But yeah, that's all that I have for this one. Bumbling here at the end, just running up the airtime for this. Yeah, as always, spirits are forever with you. Thanks again, folks. Stay gold.